Good morning. Welcome to the morning market briefing. Today is Wednesday, August 19th, 2026. I hope you're doing well. Have some interesting things to get to today, including Iran potentially targeting U.S. military bases in Europe. Among other things, we also have a few earnings reports. State of retail. Retail usually reports on a month delay. And the reason for that is that they want to make sure that it really all stems from the fourth quarter. So in the fourth quarter, they make a ton of revenue, but then there are some returns and refunds that they need to process and get the quarter closed. So they don't like closing the quarter on December 31st. They usually close the quarter on January 31st. So they're a month later, and that just extends, obviously, throughout the rest of the year. So that's why retail stocks often are on a month delay. So this week we're getting Target, TJX, Walmart. We'll talk actually a little bit about Estee Lauder today. And it's a good day for Kevin Warsh because he is married to the Estee Lauder heiress. But I wanted to start off, Tom, talking a little bit about OpenAI. OpenAI came out with its second quarter numbers, and they were not good, especially compared to Anthropic. But even in absolute terms, they generated revenue of $6.7 billion in Q2, growth of 18% quarter over quarter. That compares to 143% growth quarter over quarter in Anthropic. Right now, OpenAI is losing $12 billion a quarter, whereas Anthropic is actually making a small profit. So OpenAI has less than half of the revenue and infinitely more of the loss relative to Anthropic. Now, a lot of this is backward looking. I've definitely heard that ChatGPT Terra and Codex are really gaining share now in the last month and a half, and these things change very quickly. But optically, it's not great, and I think that it caused some of the declines in the chip stocks that we saw yesterday and the AI complex, because at the end of the day, if OpenAI and Anthropic are not generating as much revenue, that is negative for the whole edifice, because that revenue is ultimately what's going to prop up and pay for the data centers and the chips and the power and everything that's associated with it.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about our conversation yesterday about the SATs, which is going to be the loser of our fantasy football league is going to have to take the SAT. And I was thinking about all the things a lot of our lunch discussion was like, what is the math that's on the SAT? A lot of that stuff I've not used in a long time, but I was thinking the math that I actually have used quite a bit, but not functionally, but more in like the real world case would probably be calculus. And I think calculus is what needs to be applied here, which is you have to start thinking about the second derivative, the rate of change at which these AI companies are growing. Because it's one thing that's like, man, they've grown really fast, but the rate at which they're growing is not as fast as it was, so you start to get that curve, and you need to be really cognizant of which ones, are the rate of change is slowing and how slowly they are relative to other rates of change, and so it's interesting because it's like, if you ask me to sit down and start doing calculus, I'd probably not do very well. But I think that in terms of how you have to think about these things, it's more of the essence of calculus is what really actually applies a lot to what we do when it comes to, a lot of things, growth stocks, the rate of change on inflation, all these different things. And the second piece would be statistics, where you start thinking about probabilities. But what do you think the probability is that OpenAI becomes the MySpace of the artificial intelligence world? They were the first to kind of do what they do, insanely popular for a period of time, but in a short period of time, suddenly, Anthropic and Perplexity start coming out as the Facebook and Instagram and Snapchat of AI, and MySpace seems extremely pedestrian. And it was hot, and MySpace, Tom made a lot of money, but he didn't make a lot of money relative to Mark Zuckerberg. So the question is like, how do you know which ones are which ones are going to rise and fall quickly, and where ultimately the chips will fall? And I've continued to lean towards the idea that Sam Altman might have been the first mover, but I don't think he's going to be the ultimate winner here.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think it is incredibly difficult to be the first mover in a new technology and actually stay there. and I've been thinking about this a lot, and at the time, it's difficult to imagine. I mean, you kind of have the Kodak. It's like Kodak is, synonymous with cameras and innovation. IBM is synonymous with the computer, and everyone had one, and or every business had one, and ultimately what that means is, and it was synonymous. I mean, just as we think, hey, Google something today, people were saying Ask Jeeves or AOL or Yahoo or
Alibaba
or get on
or
the
no, yeah, Alibaba was a search engine. Sorry, it wasn't Alibaba. Alibaba is it was something like that. Go ahead, I'll think of it.
But then even in the early days of the internet, it was Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer doesn't even exist now, or Netscape Navigator, and we didn't know that it was going to be Chrome. In the early days of mobile phones, it wasn't. It was the Razor. It was BlackBerry. It certainly wasn't the iPhone. And I think we'd be doing. We'd be foolish to think that in 15 years from now, OpenAI and Anthropic are going to continue to be the far and away leaders in the LLM space.
Alta Vista was what I was thinking of. I was like, I said Alibaba. I was like, that's not it. But the old heads will know that Alta Vista, for a short period of time, was the premier search engine and the first that had a translator, because that got a lot of people in trouble in, I would say, 8th, 9th grade, doing your Spanish homework using the Alta Vista translator because it was not strong. But I digress.
But when we're talking about OpenAI, I think that in the near term, I think that it's going to succeed because it has to. I think there's and there are too many interested parties that need it to succeed, and I think that Codex is going to generate more revenue. And I think they fired their chief revenue officer who'd been there less than a year just recently. They cut prices. They're now in the last 6 weeks have seen a significant increase in user growth and a re-acceleration. So that slope of the line has improved, to your point, Tom. And so, yes, Q2 was bad. I think everyone knows it was bad, but now that we're seeing the numbers, it's clear how bad it was. I think one of the reasons we didn't get more of a sell-off yesterday and into today was because people kind of say, yes, that we know that Q2 was bad for OpenAI, and it's going to start picking up here. And we even talked about it yesterday with Anthropic too. I mean, July was a relatively soft month for Anthropic, maybe because people are switching to OpenAI. But it was relatively soft. It grew, but not as fast as it did in Q2. But you cannot just jump on every week or month of data. The space is moving too fast. You either have to commit and have a path of where things might be in the next year, or just avoid the space altogether. But you can't just chop and change based on each latest data point, because you're just going to get whipsawed all over the place. Now, these are private stock markets, so it's not like we're trading these, but that's how you have to approach this space.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a lot like social media. I mean, you think back to when Facebook IPO'd and was still called Facebook. The question was kind of like, yes, this is a company that's worth a lot and a lot of people are interacting with it, but how are they going to make money? And the answer was not real clear at first. And they've iterated a number of new things that didn't exist before that now create Meta. I mean, Instagram was an acquisition, as was WhatsApp, and the whole ad revenue, putting your information in and using that to sell back to you, was not really fully formulated. And so if you were like, what does Facebook look like 10 years from now? You'd be like, well, everyone's going to be on Facebook. But 10 years in the future, very few people use Facebook relative to all of the other things that they have. In fact, I would say it's almost been relegated to the trash heap of social media. And they changed their name. Probably, I mean, I don't know if Meta was a great idea because the metaverse flopped majorly, but Facebook itself is not what it once was. And there's really no way to know what any of these things are going to do in 10 years. I mean, at what, in 10 years from now, you could argue, like, everything in your life could be automated by AI, but to what degree do you do that? At what point do you stop automating things and do them yourself? Because that's the logical endpoint. It's really hard to know what that looks like or what even the capabilities will be. So it's a super unknown. It continues to be an unknown.
One of our portfolio companies that we own across almost all client portfolios is analog devices. They enable a lot of this. They are power semiconductors. They're in industrial uses. They're factory automation. They're in cars. They're in everything. I think they have 100,000 SKUs. Exceptionally long-lived chips. They generate incredible margins, excellent engineering, very well-run company. They're up 3% pre-market, but they're seeing the benefit from the data center growth. That's starting to accelerate for them. So that was good news for them as it relates to the data center. But even on the industrial side, industrial was up 53% on a year-over-year basis, and auto was up 16%. So that's good. On retail, we are getting, as I mentioned, some retail news. We had Home Depot yesterday. We have Lowe's today. Lowe's is definitely losing market share to Home Depot. Lowe's is a lot more DIY. Home Depot is more pro. Pro is doing better than DIY. Therefore, Home Depot is doing better than Lowe's. You also had Target and TJX. And I want to just camp out here for a minute. Target, everyone knows. TJX is the parent company of Marshalls, TJ Maxx, Home Goods, and they have some other properties as well.
TK Maxx.
TK Maxx in
the
England.
UK, yeah.
And I think they have HomeSense now. The Home Goods business is actually doing fairly well. And I think that this represents a little bit of a mix shift upward. I think that people go to Home Goods for their home products and don't really view them as a budget retailer versus TJ Maxx and Marshalls is a little bit more, hey, just throw all these clothes here. Kind of a grab bag store. And they've executed exceptionally well over the last, decade. But I'm actually beginning to see, and this is a theory that I'm trying right now, I think we're beginning to see a mix shift back up in the value spectrum. I think people are moving from, TJ Maxx, Marshalls, up to Target. I think people are going to Walmart, but going to Walmart because they think that they actually have better stuff, not because it's cheap. I think initially it was because it was cheap. Now they're like, actually, Walmart has some pretty good stuff at a decent price point. And I think that that's what we're seeing in the market, which is good for Walmart, it's good for Target, it's good for Costco. It's not good for TJ Maxx. And on top of that, for TJ Maxx, they buy inventory that hasn't been able to be sold at other retailers. And so if inventory in the channel is lean and other retailers are actually selling product now, TJ Maxx is going to get squeezed because their sales are only at 1%, but their costs are going to be higher because the retailers they would normally buy from don't need to sell. So I think that we're starting to see a little bit of a mix shift up in that space.
I'd be interested to see how much, if you ask management how much they've been hurt by the fading popularity of polo shirts, because polo was huge at a certain time, and then TJ Maxx launched their fake polo brand, the U.S. Polo Association, which was a staple of my wardrobe when I was clinging to the lower rungs of income in society. But it was like you could buy a U.S. Polo Association shirt and no one would know the difference, but it was like $8 at TJ Maxx as opposed to $50 at Macy's for a polo shirt. But I wonder, because like polo, like the straight polo shirts, have been sort of, that space has gotten crowded. And I mean, I know that TJ Maxx was making fat margins on their knockoff U.S. Polo Association shirts. So at least out of my wallet share.
And then finally, Estee Lauder also reported, I hadn't heard this before, but apparently fragrance maxing is really big with Gen Z, and you're seeing the results here. Also, skincare did very well for Estee Lauder. Kevin Warsh is certainly an interested party here because his wife is the heiress to the Estee Lauder fortune. So he's having a great day. Elizabeth Warren has got to be super salty right now. So I'm curious your thoughts on any of this. The fragrance maxing, Kevin Warsh.
I mean, notably, we had a couple of young people interviewing. We're adding some people on the client service side, and there was a young man in here who was fragrance maxing big time in the office. There was a conversation at lunch that flabbergasted me because, I pride myself on a certain way of carrying myself as a man, but there was a discussion on what everyone's fragrance was among the young boys maybe a month ago at lunchtime, and that everyone needed to have a fragrance. I personally do not, but it was big when I was in middle school. There were two things that were hot, and they were both spray based. One was Banaka, which was hot among middle schoolers, but was really for smokers. It was like the breath spray, which used to be sort of a movie trope where like, oh, I'm gonna go over there, and they, it's in like Dumb and Dumber. He sprays the Banaka the wrong way, and then like Abercrombie based
Fierce.
Yeah. Woods was the one that was hot when I was in middle school, but that really went away, and I think that at a certain point they eliminated the use of fragrances in my middle school because it had gotten too out of control and the teachers were getting irritated.
I feel like millennials kind of got the fragrance maxing out of the way in middle school, and then no one had fragrances there. Like millennials basically created no fragrance zones for Gen Z, and now Gen Z is all finding these fragrances and going absolutely nuts for them.
Well, it was like you were looks maxing as a middle schooler. You're wearing your Abercrombie clothes and your puka shell necklaces and your fragrances, but then you learned to drive, and then you were doing other stuff like cigar maxing and pornography maxing, which those kids all do. It's the reverse now. They all can do all that on their phones very early, and then they don't learn to drive, and then they don't do any drinking. And so now they're like, well, what's really cool? Oh, we should spray ourselves with Estee Lauder fragrances. Because they didn't do the natural progression of what it is to find your adult life, by leaning into things that seem very adult when you're 12. And then when you become an actual adult doing adult things. So it's all backwards and strange. Gen Z is there's something very strange about the way they were raised. And I blame Gen Z for that.
Well, and they blame COVID.
Yeah, but I think it's more of an internal problem. You need to focus on yourself, not what other people are putting towards you.
We're continuing to hunt for oil outside of the Middle East. Right now, Iran, like we said yesterday, isn't going anywhere quickly. The latest news is that they're looking at bombing U.S. sites in Cyprus and Bulgaria, which would not be very nice. I don't. That seems like a threat. UAE, they shot some missiles toward UAE that landed in the water, and UAE said we're now cutting Iran off from any financial transactions. We're not doing any business with them until you hear otherwise. So you got all that going on in the Middle East. You have refinery shutdowns in China and Russia and obviously the Middle East. And so in the United States, we're saying we got to become more independent on oil, and we got to do it quickly. And so we're really leaning into Venezuela here. I think there'll be a few announcements over the next couple of days. We've already had a couple. Schlumberger SLB, which we actually own in some accounts, has made a deal with Venezuela providing exploration services. Now, that won't really change their bottom line very much quickly, but if drilling activity does begin in earnest, that's where SLB is really going to make some nice money. And then Hunt Oil has also signed a deal, kind of a production revenue share deal with Venezuela. So interesting on two oil fields, and more oil companies are set to join the party there as well. So this is happening. I think it is a strategic imperative of the Trump administration to do that. And so it's just something that we're going to continue to watch going forward because, like I said, the U.S. and Western countries in general need to figure out a way to become more independent and less reliant on European oil, Middle East oil and gas.
Slightly related, but Ben learned yesterday that you can't buy cigarettes until you're 21 now. And also you can't smoke in high school, which we could do. I didn't do it. I was never really been a cigarette smoker, but there was a smoking section, at least when I was a sophomore in high school. I think they eventually eliminated it you could smoke at Waffle House. In fact, people went there specifically to do that. So.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it certainly takes away one of those things growing up that was just characteristic of how you grew up. I mean, it's like removing the blackboard from a school.
Yeah. We had blackboards when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And overhead projectors. Those things don't exist anymore.
Removing those. I mean, it totally changed it. You go into a classroom now, it's totally different. You go past the corner outside of the school and there is no one smoking there.
We didn't have Wi-Fi until I was in college.
Yeah, we didn't have Wi-Fi. And even then, Wi-Fi in college was spotty.
Yeah.
Big time.
You had to go to the computer lab to print stuff out. But I don't know. We've talked about it before where the UK put this law into place a couple months ago where you're not even allowed to buy cigarettes ever if you were born after a certain date, and then they'll just eventually be illegal to anyone going forward born after, I think it was 2005 or something. I don't know. It's like, you should wear your seatbelt, but that's your right, man. If you don't want to wear your seatbelt, don't. If you want to smoke cigarettes, go sick. In fact, I would say that it's a part of living is to do things like that, at least in moderation.
I mean, I think it would have been more interesting if the UK said, you can do it, but you're not going to be able to, you're going to disqualify yourself from the NHS.
Yeah. I mean, not to belabor the point, we talked about it yesterday. You should listen to this podcast with Jimmy Carr on Modern Wisdom, but he was talking about, he was like, I'm actually in favor of gangs. I'm in favor of drinking, and I'm in favor of gambling. And his points on all those were really interesting, but the two that really I thought resonated were gangs, where it's like, where are men supposed to be? He's like men benefit so much from being around other men, and young men, basically throttling each other's behavior through things like bullying and having a social hierarchy, which I totally agree with. I could not agree with more. And then the second one was the drinking. He was like, we should lower the drinking age to 16. He's like, but you have to have two friends, because the social aspect of that has been eliminated. He's like, and you wonder why Gen Z is so isolated and we have these weird incels and stuff. It's because they don't have that culture of like, I'm going to go get a beer with my friends. They're like, I'm going to go home and put my headphones on and argue with 13-year-olds while I shoot them on the internet. I mean, it's isolating. The isolation piece, I think, is what people don't understand about all of the weird changes we made. But, you can go stand outside and you can meet somebody in the cigarette zone outside your high school, So it's something to think about. Like, not all bad behavior is bad for you, I think. I mean, I don't know. I think bullying has its place. I think, drinking and smoking and fighting have their places. And I think these are just my opinions, and I'm subject to be wrong. So anyway, that's our finishing note for today, I think.
Yeah, we'll to be continued tomorrow day.
Burritos, let's go.
Yep. All right. Have a great day. Bye.